The NHL's dominant style of play has shifted over the last 5 years. The Edmonton Oilers are in a position to benefit.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. I'm your host, Nick Zararis. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Join all the action at FanDuel to play daily dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a home run this MLB season. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, we are going to be diving into some of the macro level style changes in the NHL. Now, if you're looking for a more detailed written out explanation, I covered this pretty thoroughly last week in my Theory of Hockey newsletter, where I explore hockey tactics, strategy, roster construction, and other big picture philosophical concepts. So if you want to get a little bit more into the weeds, today's show is the broad strokes to give you an understanding of what I mean when I say the game changer. So we're going to start out talking about why this is all tied to the idea of efficiency and being more productive with the opportunities you do get. In our middle segment, we're going to talk about directly how these style changes are impacting the way the game in the NHL is played today. And then in our final segment, I will give an idea as to how defenses and goaltending might try to counteract this, an idea of perhaps the limitations of this line of thinking and what teams could do perhaps to push this envelope even forward, and then ultimately make the case that eventually defense and goaltending have to come back around. So to start out, over the last 20 years or so, as we have entered a more deeply financialized economy and frankly world, the opportunities to make more from less have become the driving factor of innovation, of intellectual thinking, and frankly, the driving force of our existence right now. The simple matter of the fact is, the powers that be, the big time stakeholders, governments, financial markets, are all oriented around this idea of how do we make as much as possible with as little as possible? How do we create maximum efficiency? Now, that line of thinking does have limitations, especially when we talk about financial markets, securitization, debts, etc. But from a sports context, I think this is where the efficiency and the MBA line of thinking can really be informative and instructive. So when you think about decision making in strategy, a lot of the time, the people who are making these macro level decisions on corporate boards, these CEOs, these chief financial officers, all of these decisions come back to an overarching school of ideas. And depending on your background, your education, your life experiences, how you choose to apply these philosophies ultimately determine how you're viewed in those spaces. Because if you take on more risk, you are considered to be innovative if those risks work out, but if they flop, you are considered to be a failure. Hell, we have seen a number of people on the grand scale continue to try and push and push and push and ultimately go over into the criminal side of things. When you look at things like Enron, Sam Bankman-Fried, the FTX market guy, all of those are examples of people who were at one point or another considered to be innovative with whatever product or service they were creating or selling. And that style of thinking, the how do we do more with less, the how do we create more from what we already have, that's born a lot of the world we live in right now. When you look at things like subscription services being priced at what a good would be, slightly cheaper month to month, but over the course of year after year after year, that money is going to add up. When Adobe charges you $40 per month, yes, that is cheaper than paying them $500 up front for a good or for a service or, an application. But over the course of the lifespan of your subscription, you would give them infinitely more than $500. That world where you would simply buy Adobe Photoshop for that given year and you would own it in perpetuity does not exist anymore. And that idea, that efficiency strategy in the sports world has been applied to the point of homogeneity. And I think you can make a really strong case that when you look across the board in basketball, in football, in baseball, and yes, now even in hockey, the points of emphasis as to what makes for a successful team in terms of actual in-game application are all rooted in similar principles. We have watched over the last 15 to 20 years a widespread adaptation of the same overarching principles of how do we create as many advantages for ourselves as possible? How do we play the matchups? How do we use the abundance of data and information we have at our fingertips to create as many advantages as possible? And it all comes down to this idea of efficiency in production is tied to probability and risk. How much risk are you willing to take on based on how likely something is to happen, a certain given result? How much risk you can tolerate often becomes that point of demarcation between those who make it and those who don't. Anybody who tells you you can't take risks isn't totally honest with you. You have to take risks, even in small things in life. Silly things like, am I going to jaywalk against this red light? Can I afford to leave for work 5 minutes earlier if I get up 5 minutes earlier? Can I get up to work out before I go to work, or do I have to work out after work? Those little things, those risks, those chances. We all have to take chances. Now, there are bigger scale ones. There are ones that talk about the jobs of hundreds or thousands of other people based on a decision you might make. All of this is interconnected on the idea that we operate in a cohesive, unified system, that all of these factors, all of these market forces are at some level interconnected with each other. And we all operate under the assumption that we agree to a certain baseline, rational way of thinking about things. And when I come to the sports space with this line of sociological and anthropological line of thinking where we try and evaluate decisions based on a criteria and a philosophy, you get a little bit more pushback here than you do in other spaces, because there's an element of sports that's supposed to be a bit more human. There's an element of sports that's supposed to have an element of romanticism and a little bit of magic to it. Now, the best moments in sports still contain that. When you have those storybook moments, I always come back to the Chris Davis kick six against Alabama in the Iron Bowl in 2012 as being probably the single most insane sports moment I watched in real time happen. I think about the Cubs winning the World Series in 2016 as being those symbolic, large-scale watershed moments of, oh my God, I can't believe that just happened. And I bring that up because I think in the sports world, you are watching these two ideas really impact each other head on, where you have the traditionalist old school mentality that is built on anecdotes and personal experience. When you listen to former players lament the state of the game, regardless of sport, when you have the old head NBA, MLB, NHL, or NFL guys talking about, well, the game's not the same anymore. When we played, it was X, Y, and Z. It was so much more this. It was so much more that. I get it. Because when you consider how football and basketball and baseball and hockey were played 20, 30 years ago, the way the game looks on the field or on the ice is wholeheartedly different, or on the court in the case of basketball. You look at a basketball game from the 90s, the game is so much slower. The tempo and pacing is very different, where teams are holding the ball a lot longer in the shot clock. They're bringing the ball up the floor a lot slower. The spacing is a lot more congested and compressed. There are a lot more mid-range shots. In baseball, you watch 10, 20 years ago, there are a lot more pitchers who aren't just pumping velocity. It's guys nibbling corners. It's trying to pitch to contact, to create ground balls, to get out of trouble. In the in the football world, you are having 2 and 3 running back formations pretty consistently. Running the ball is more dominant. You aren't having a lot of formations with 3 or 4 wide receivers or pass catchers, if you want to include tight ends in that, on the field. In hockey, you are watching significantly fewer guys taking long galloping strides, holding onto the puck. You are watching a lot more passing. You are watching a lot less rimming, a lot less pucks being alley-ooped out of the zone. You are watching goalies with a lot poorer technique. All of the sports have changed dramatically in the last 30 years based on this efficiency principle. The best example I can give you as the conflict between anecdotal evidence and real life experience is the way I think about football. And I've been talking about this forever. So you are a professional football coach. You're Kyle Shanahan. You're Sean McVay. You have been in and around football your entire life. You have played in games as a kid up to a certain point in your development. You've been an assistant, a coordinator, a head coach. You have had hundreds of thousands of football games in your life. Now, compare that to somebody like me. And I have a very specific application for this, so bear with me. I have probably played close to 10,000 games of football in Madden, maybe more than that at this point in my life. I've consistently been playing the EA Sports Madden NFL franchise since 2004 or 5. That's 20 plus years of playing a video game, thousands or hundreds of games each and every year. Every single one of those games is an application of football thinking, where I have to manage the clock, I have to manage possessions, where even though the individual mechanics within each year's game varies, the styles of play within those years varies year to year based on who's good and whatnot, I have all of those games of football where it is purely about managing the clock and decision-making in my Rolodex of plays. And ultimately, based on that experience, I have developed the philosophy of we want to kick off always when we win the coin toss. We want to get that last possession of the first half. We want to receive the kickoff at the start of the second half. And we want to have 2 straight possessions every game as often as we possibly can, because having 2 straight possessions is such a material advantage. Now, the way this applies in its actuality comes down to the idea that everything manifests into this form of homogeneity, where because everybody has this similar line of thinking, it creates similar outcomes. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers because I got a little too excited there and went over on our first break. When we come back, we are going to dive into why this decision-making process is yielding the results it is in the NHL and a whole lot more right after this. Baseball fans, if you think you know who's hitting a home run today, FanDuel is giving you a free chance to call your shot with daily dingers. It's easy to play. Just make your free pick for who you think will hit a home run in their game that given day. If you're right, you'll receive a profit boost to use on your next bet for a chance at extra winnings. Best of all, you can make a free pick every day throughout the MLB season. Daily Dingers is another fun way to stay engaged with every day's baseball games. Whether you're following your favorite teams, your favorite stars, or keeping an eye on matchups across the league, it keeps you involved in the fun. Every game has someone capable of going deep. Now you get the chance to make your prediction before first pitch. We're in the midst of a very weird baseball season where it feels like the Dodgers with Shohei, with Mookie, with Freddie Freeman, with Will Smith, with Teoscar Hernandez, now with Tyreek Skubal are on a march to the World Series. Can Kyle Schwarber and Bryce Harper avenge some demons? Can the Phillies go all the way? Is there a team we're not thinking of out there capable of going on a run this late? Maybe, dare I say, the Red Sox? So, FanDuel has one question. Are you ready to play your game? Join the action today at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to play Daily Dingers and make your free pick on who's hitting a home run. Play ball and swing for the fences on FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers as we are getting into the philosophical ideas behind our sports world today. And the efficiency conundrum will eventually reach a tipping point, but we'll get there in our next segment. So the way you should think about this idea, the way efficiency impacts hockey today and the way you should be thinking about it is how decisions impact each other. So I always come back to the idea of what's the best play we can make. And now, that's a very broad idea because every game situation is a little bit different. Every game in of itself is a little bit different. But our overarching goal should be trying to create as much dangerous offense as possible, as often as possible. The goal should be to get the puck to high danger areas to create as many opportunities as possible that are likely to result in goals. We have gotten there, and the way the numbers bear out. So when we talk about scoring attempts, which are different from shot attempts, scoring attempts include saves, they include missed shots, they include block shots. Those are relatively stable over the last 5 to 10 years. The number of attempts at hitting the net is still relatively the same. The number of shots on goal, though, has continued to steadily decline over the last 5 to 10 years. Now, you might ask yourself, how is that congruous? How can teams still be having the same number relatively of scoring attempts as shot attempts? And it's twofold. So number one, defenses and goaltending have gotten better. Where shots formerly would have gotten on net or hit the goalie or resulted in goals aren't getting through at all. Defenses have taken away lanes. They are playing better defense, and they are forcing players into taking either poorer scoring chances that miss the net entirely, or, and what is happening more often than not, offenses are being extremely selective in the chances they do choose to take. So it's multifaceted. Not only are attacking teams creating better overall offense, defenses and goalies are taking away scoring attempts that would have formerly resulted in shots on goal. And that's why scoring attempts are relatively stable while shot attempts are down. So that's layer number one. Then you go number two. Expected goals and high danger chances are both up in spite of the fact that shots on goal are down. That should tell you teams are getting the puck to more dangerous areas of the ice more often over the course of the last 10 years because of the emphasis that defenses are forcing. You know, it's a very interesting conundrum that in getting better at defense and in getting better at goaltending, they have in effect created the offensive conditions for attacking teams to make better decisions. It's a very ironic conundrum that teams face now where because defensive strategy and defensive technique has gotten better over the last 10 years and the points of emphasis on defense have become better, the scoring attempts that are getting through are better. The scoring attempts that become shots on goal are yielding more expected goals. They are yielding more high danger chances. And then, of course, the actual goals numbers are going up. And this is all at even strength on top of the power play. It would be one thing if these underlying results were happening only at even strength or only on the power play. But across both game situations, defenses and goaltending are so optimized now that offenses can only create really good chances, and those really good chances are more likely to yield results. Those shots that don't get taken anymore. You know, one of the real efficiency barometers is the volume of shots from your blue line, because while you do want your defenseman to shoot the puck on occasion, the simple matter of the fact is those are lower quality shots. The further away you are from the net, the less likely it is to result in a goal. Even if you're the Evan Bouchard, Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes, you are a defenseman who has a really good shot. A Jacob Chikrin, for example, your chances of a shot you take from where you are on the ice most often resulting in a goal are lower than a less talented shooter shooting the puck from closer to the net. Those points of emphasis of getting the puck to those dangerous areas. You know, there's a very famous clip when Patrick Ewing, the basketball Hall of Famer, was the coach at Georgetown, the college team. There's a very famous clip of him in a huddle during a TV timeout where a player took a really bad shot during the last possession, and Coach Ewing is going, "Is that your shot? Do you work on that shot? Do you practice that shot? When do you work on that shot?" And that's the way you need to be thinking about this. It was one of the common refrains in Darnell Nurse discourse, the idea that just because you can take that low quality point shot to get a shot on goal to in effect heat up the goalie doesn't mean you necessarily should. And that's the way you need to start thinking about hockey. What is my play about to do to the game state? If I take this unblocked, no traffic 40-foot wrist shot with the goalie having a clear line of sight, the chances of this resulting in a goal are nil. The chances of this being saved are high. We cannot continue to sustain this offensive zone possession if the goalie freezes the puck. I need to keep this puck moving, or I need to skate this puck into a more dangerous area to create space either for myself or for my teammates. That's the way you need to be thinking about decision-making and risk-taking, because that's how it manifests in its actuality. What your decision does for the game state is ultimately how this line of thinking of efficiency bears out. You don't want point shots from defensemen. You don't want shots from the walls. You want to get that puck in between the hash marks. You want to get it to areas of the ice where your players are going to be in the best possible position to score. A good example of this in an Oilers application, for most teams, the shot that Draisaitl takes on the power play, the really sharp angle near side shot where he is almost even with the post, is not a shot a lot of teams are going to replicate. A lot of players in the league cannot hit that shot consistently. But because Draisaitl is such a gifted shooter, he has such a plus shot, he is one of the few players where that is a higher efficiency play than it would be if he were taking a shot from a more traditional angle on the power play. The last point I wanted to make on this second segment before we talk about maybe some of the counters to this, some of the bigger picture questions, This does mean everybody's playing more similar. This does mean everybody is building rosters more similarly in trying to create these game conditions. That's the way you got to be thinking. How do I put together a roster to create the ideal game conditions as often as possible? Now, that might make us weaker or more vulnerable in certain aspects of the game, but if we have a comfortable control where we feel more often than not we are going to be the better team, we're okay having some deficiencies in our overall game because the areas of the game we are so strong in are more valuable than what maybe the entire aggregate of each individual skill within hockey might create. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I'll explain why maybe there will be an opportunity for defenses and goaltending to come back around, what it means maybe if the NHL wants to try and find ways to make the game a bit more diverse in strategy, and a whole lot more right after this. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on today's edition of Locked On Oilers as we are waxing philosophically about the state of the game, why everybody is starting to play a style more similar to each other, regardless of sport. And I think the watershed moment for me, as far as when I knew the nerds were winning the argument, is when Nick Saban admitted you needed to be able to score to win in the college football landscape now. For a long time, the SEC had the most traditional NFL style of play that most mimicked what players saw at the next level. It was physical, it was fast, it was very methodical, it was hard to throw the ball because there wasn't a lot of space. Defenses had a real advantage. Over the course of the 2010s, as strategies adopted to make the game easier for skill players, because skill players are the most highly recruited, they're the hardest players to land, you saw a wide scale change where over the course of 5 or 6 years, teams like LSU and Alabama went from rostering players like Jake Coker and Blake Sims and Zach Mettenberger to Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. And that change in the NFL over the course of the last 10 years, we have watched an inversion happen where for much of the 2010s, the dominant way of thinking, we want to have 3 receivers, 1 tight end, 1 running back on the field as often as possible. We need to be able to run out of this personnel grouping. We need to be able to throw out of this personnel grouping. One of the advantages that guys like Sean McVay, like Kevin O'Connell, like Kyle Shanahan have innovated out of this is the idea, well, let's have 2 tight ends and 2 receivers. Because when we have that second tight end on the field, that creates matchup advantages for us, where if we can run the ball effectively with 2 tight ends on the field, because that's going to give us a personnel advantage because we have those extra blockers, that's going to help us because when we come out in that same look with 2 tight ends, a running back, and 2 receivers, that's going to make it easier to throw the ball. And when we can throw out of running personnel groups and we can run out of passing personnel groups, that puts defenses on their heels. That creates advantages where defenses are going to really struggle to play up to what they could potentially do based on personnel. Now, I doubt we will see that type of personnel swing in the NHL. I think we're probably kind of far away, frankly, from the idea of teams playing 4 forwards, 1 defenseman consistently, or maybe, dare I say, in certain game states, 3 defensemen and 2 forwards. I do think there are applications for those ideas. I think there is a world where we could consistently see 4 forward, 1 defenseman deployments in certain game situations in the not so distant future. We've seen a number of NHL teams toy around with the idea of 5 forward power play units with their best puck handler running the point. It does create shorthanded opportunities for the other team going back the other way. But I do think it is an opportunity to create a material advantage for getting the puck to the most dangerous areas more consistently than not. Now, we are not all that far removed from an NHL where it felt really challenging to score. You look at the NHL 10, 15 years ago, and I remember watching SportsCenter. I remember watching Around the Horn and PTI, where talking heads were debating, is it too hard to score? Do we need to make the goalie pad smaller? Do we need to make the net bigger? Do we need to try and change the way offsides works? Do we need to change the way icing works? What can we do to incentivize scoring? Over time, offenses have caught up. They have found ways around the advantages that defenses and goaltending have. Now, if you're a defending team, you still play pretty good defense and you get burned. That's the reality of the situation right now because the game is skewed towards offense. When everybody is playing a similar style, when the game overall is skewing towards offense, it's creating more favorable offensive situations more often. What do? How do you philosophically approach this issue? If we are taking away all of the scoring chances we possibly can defensively. We are blocking more shots than ever. We are directing pucks away from the net. They aren't getting there. But the ones that do get there are more dangerous than ever. That creates quite the philosophical conundrum. What does that do to our goaltending if consistently across the board, across the entire league, other than the handful of elite guys, save percentage continues to trickle in the wrong direction? If the only shots we are conceding are really good ones, do we need to try and incentivize teams into taking crappier shots? Do we need to give up shooting lanes from further away and maybe try and create an environment where teams are inclined to take those lower quality chances? And look, I have always come on this show and defended the players who overpass. I think especially when we're talking about special teams and we're talking about extremely high-end players, the way those guys see the game on the ice level is so much more superior than what we do on TV. It is very easy to watch the game at home on TV and be confounded with some of the decision making as far as overpassing or trying to pass the puck into the net, as talking heads like to say. The players on the ice see the game the way they do because they are at ice level. They do not have as good of depth perception as we do watching at home from an elevated, slanted angle where we can see where all guys are on the ice at any given time and get an idea of the spacing. Because of that, it often creates an environment where if you're at the game, you will hear people in and around you screaming shoot, even though it's a defenseman with the puck on their backhand 40 feet away from the net with multiple bodies in between them and the net. Because the way they watch the game is really rooted in angles and spacing from a perspective the players cannot see, they do not understand. More often than not, when that person who's had a couple beers and a couple hot dogs is screaming shoot at the top of their lungs, they do not understand that shooting lane is not actually there. It's the same principle as people who think they can complete a pass in the NFL. That guy looks open, right? Yeah, he is open if you have an NFL caliber arm. If you are a guy who hasn't thrown a football since you were in high school, you are not going to be able to sneak a football into the window of an NFL defense because those defenders are going to jump it, they are going to intercept it, and they are going to run it back the other way because they play at a faster tempo. It is the same exact principle as that guy who is yelling shoot at the top of their lungs when we are at a game itself. Now, as far as defenses, as far as goalies, we continue to see teams reinvent the way they approach the goaltending position from an organizational perspective. I entertain the idea of maybe teams that don't necessarily have that traditional number one goalie with more salary cap space to play with, carrying three goalies more consistently. I think the Oilers, I think Buffalo, I think Montreal even to some degree could entertain this based on their respective cap situations. I think that's one opportunity. Number two, I do think we are going to see some type of counterbalance the other way where defenses are going to start to sell out more to create rush opportunities going back the other way to maybe try and force teams that are getting the puck in tight more often into being a little more considerate. You know, I talk about this a lot when it comes to the McDavid-Hyman group at even strength. Because they get so compressed and so tight to the net, they are susceptible to giving up chances going back the other way because everybody is so tight and compressed to the net front and they are so tilted towards scoring that when they do mess up, when they do lose control and the puck goes back the other way, it's really hard for them to go back and get back. You know, I do think there are opportunities here from a strategic perspective. But the NHL is changing. There is no way around it. The game is faster and more skilled than ever. It is forcing teams to reevaluate how they think about defense and goaltending. And time's going to tell us how those guys on that side of the game come back. That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much to everybody that made Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL Game Night, where the NHL season never ends. For your second watch of the day, go check out the first ever 24/7 national Locked On YouTube channel. I will talk to you guys real soon. Until then, let's go Oilers.